Vietnam, 1967. The jungle was alive, but not with what anyone could see. Beneath the roots and the mud, under the earth itself, something moved. Hidden below the feet of American soldiers stretched an invisible world. Miles of tunnels carved by hand. A network so vast it could swallow entire battalions without a trace. To fight the war in Vietnam, the United States had to fight not just the enemy, but the ground beneath them. They called them the tunnel rats. Volunteers who crawled into holes barely wide enough for their shoulders, armed with a pistol, a flashlight, and a heartbeat loud enough to give them away. Their job was simple: go down, clear the tunnels, come back alive. Most didn't make it far before realising what they had signed up for. The heat was unbearable. The air was heavy and thin, filled with dust, rot, and the sharp sting of gunpowder. Every inch forward was a question of survival. The tunnels of Cu Chi and the Iron Triangle weren't random holes. They were entire underground cities, 3, sometimes 4 levels deep. Hospitals, armories, kitchens, even meeting rooms. Every twist was a trap, every shadow a potential ambush. For the Viet Cong, these tunnels were home. For the Americans, they were nightmares made of dirt and darkness. The first time a tunnel rat dropped into a hole, the world above vanished in an instant. The light from the surface faded until there was only a pinprick behind them. Ahead, pure black. The silence pressed in like weight. The smell of smoke and damp earth was everywhere. Each breath came with a reminder. One wrong move could set off a grenade, open a pit, or trigger a trapdoor hiding an enemy only inches away. They learned to move slow, to crawl with one hand extended, brushing the walls for hidden wires or false panels. Their flashlights barely cut through the dark, illuminating only a few feet at a time. The tunnels curved and branched endlessly, each passage more suffocating than the last. Claustrophobia wasn't an emotion. It was a constant companion. Sometimes they would find signs of life, a half-eaten meal, a pair of sandals, the faint echo of footsteps ahead. Other times they found death. Bodies left where they fell, faces frozen in fear. The Viet Cong didn't always fight in the tunnels. Sometimes they let the traps do it for them. Scorpions, snakes and spikes were their silent weapons. And still, the tunnel rats kept going. They weren't driven by orders or glory. They were driven by something deeper. The belief that if they didn't face what was down there, no one else would. Above ground, the war was measured in airstrikes and artillery. Below, it was measured in inches, in heartbeats, in the cold touch of earth pressing against your face. The tunnels were more than a battlefield. They were the edge of sanity itself. When a tunnel rat disappeared below the surface, nobody knew if they would ever see daylight again. The deeper they crawled, the more the tunnels seemed to come alive. Every inch of earth pressed against their backs, every sound magnified until even their heartbeat sounded like footsteps. It wasn't just darkness down there, it was a different kind of world, one where time slowed and every breath felt borrowed. The tunnels of Cu Chi stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the jungle, linking villages, supply depots, and secret meeting points. To the Viet Cong, this was home, a living, breathing organism of mud and stone. They knew every twist, every pit, every hidden chamber. To the Americans, it was a maze built by ghosts. The deeper they went, the harder it became to tell which way was forward. Tunnel rats soon learned that the walls themselves were their enemy. They were slick with condensation and often layered with false panels hiding booby traps. A misplaced hand could pull a wire, triggering grenades or collapsing a passage. In the tightest tunnels, the soldiers could barely raise their arms. Crawling meant dragging your body through mud, broken wood and the bones of the dead. Sometimes they had to exhale just to squeeze through a gap, the tunnel closing around them like a coffin. The air grew hotter with every foot. Sweat pooled in their eyes, mixing with dirt until vision blurred. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness in narrow cones, revealing brief flashes. A rusted canteen, a pair of sandals, a blood-stained wall. Each flicker of light felt like a warning. The smell down there was unforgettable. Mould, rot, and something metallic that lingered in the back of the throat. The deeper sections had almost no oxygen. Some soldiers passed out before they could even turn around. Those who did make it back up would emerge gasping, covered in mud, shaking uncontrollably. But most went back down again the next day. The tunnels were layered with traps designed to exploit fear. There were false floors that dropped men into pits of spikes, tripwires attached to grenades, doors that opened into sudden gunfire. Even animals were turned into weapons. Bamboo cages of snakes placed near entrances, triggered to release at the slightest movement. In the dark, everything was a threat. Yet inside this maze of death, the Viet Cong thrived. They built living quarters, armories, and even theatres underground. Messages and supplies travelled through the tunnels faster than any radio could send them. Above ground, the jungle burned under napalm. Below, life went on as if untouched. For the Americans, this was a new kind of war. One where courage wasn't measured by firepower, but by how far a man was willing to crawl into the dark. The labyrinth below wasn't meant to be conquered, it was meant to consume. And for many it did. They weren't the biggest, the strongest, or the loudest, but they were the ones who didn't flinch when the hole opened up in front of them. The tunnel rats, small, wiry, steady men, were built for what no one else dared to do. They weren't chosen for their rank or medals. They were chosen because they could fit, and because fear didn't stop them. By 1967, the tunnels had become one of the US military's worst nightmares. Commanders needed men who could go down and bring back maps, documents, and any sign of what was happening underground. But there was no manual for this kind of warfare. Each volunteer stepped into something no one truly understood. A place where training meant nothing, and instincts were all that mattered. Most tunnel rats were barely in their 20s. They carried as little as possible: a pistol, a flashlight, and a knife. Some tied a rope around their waist so they could be pulled out if they didn't return. Every man had his own ritual before going down. Some checked their weapon 3 times. Others said nothing at all. They knew once the earth closed above them, they were on their own. Inside the tunnels they moved like shadows, slow, deliberate, and silent. The air was so still they could hear their own pulse pounding in their ears. Each breath had to be controlled. Even the smallest sound could give them away. Many carried revolvers instead of semi-automatics because shell casings bouncing off the walls could echo and reveal their position. Every step was a test of nerve. The deeper they went, the more the weight of the world pressed down. Some compared it to being buried alive, the feeling of soil pushing on your chest, of walls closing in until you could barely breathe. Panic was the real enemy. Once it took hold, the mission was over. A man who panicked underground didn't just fail, he died. They learned to read the tunnels like living things. A change in air pressure meant an opening nearby. A certain smell meant explosives. A flicker of heat might mean a hidden vent. Every sense was sharpened to a razor's edge. They didn't have to see danger to know it was there. They could feel it. There was no glory in their work, no parades, no songs, no stories told back home. They did the job because it had to be done, because someone had to go first. Above ground, the war was fought with helicopters and artillery. Below, it was fought with flashlights and whispers. The tunnel rats didn't look like heroes, but they went where no one else would, crawling through the veins of Vietnam's hidden war. They were men who looked death in the eye and crawled toward it. The deeper the tunnels went, the closer they came to death. Down there, the war wasn't loud, it was silent, slow, creeping, and suffocating. The explosions above felt like distant thunder, muffled by tons of dirt. But inside the tunnels, death waited in stillness. It was in the air they breathed, in the walls they touched, in every inch of the path ahead. No one ever forgot their first kill underground. It wasn't like combat on the surface. There was no distance, no time to think. Sometimes it happened face to face. 2 men crawling toward each other in the dark, their flashlights flickering, the silence breaking in a burst of violence that lasted seconds. A flash, a scream, then nothing but ringing ears and the smell of gunpowder. The Viet Cong fought with brutal ingenuity. They set tripwires across narrow passages, buried grenades in mud floors, built false walls that hid snipers waiting for movement. Bamboo spikes dipped in poison-lined pits beneath thin mats. Even the air was a weapon, sometimes filled with smoke, gas, or the stench of decay so thick it choked every breath. Tunnel rats learned to move like ghosts. They would pause for minutes at a time, listening. The faint shuffle of movement ahead could mean a fighter waiting with a bayonet. A sudden draft of air could mean an opening, or worse, a dead end. In that world of shadows, the senses became more valuable than weapons. Hearing, touch, even smell could save your life. But not all enemies were human. The tunnels were alive with creatures drawn to darkness, spiders the size of fists, swarms of centipedes, and snakes coiled in side chambers. More than one tunnel rat met his end not by gunfire, but by venom. The tunnels didn't need to kill you, they could let you die on your own. When a man went down and didn't come back, his team rarely knew what happened. Sometimes they'd hear a single gunshot echo up through the dirt. Other times, nothing at all. Retrieving the bodies was almost impossible. The tunnels were too narrow, too dangerous. Many tunnel rats simply became part of the underground world they tried to conquer. Yet for all the danger they pressed on. Every tunnel they cleared was a small victory, a chance to recover maps, documents, or supplies that could cripple enemy operations. But each descent came at a cost. The fear never left them. Even back on the surface, they could still feel the weight of the earth pressing down, smell the damp air, hear the faint echoes of dripping water and distant breathing that wasn't their own. The tunnels beneath Vietnam weren't just a battlefield. They were a graveyard, a silent kingdom of the dead, where courage was tested in darkness and fear never stopped growing. For the tunnel rats, death was always close. But stopping meant letting the enemy breathe. And so they crawled deeper still. Above the jungle, the war was chaos. Gunships roaring, bombs falling, and artillery thundering through the hills. But beneath the soil, another war unfolded, one fought in silence, in the dark, and almost entirely unseen. This was the hidden war of the tunnels, a conflict that defied everything soldiers had been trained for. The Viet Cong had turned the earth itself into a fortress. Every tunnel was a piece of a vast system connecting command posts, supply lines, hospitals, and living quarters. They could disappear underground in seconds, reappear miles away, and strike again before the Americans knew where they'd gone. What looked like a simple hole in the ground could open into a complex with multiple levels, escape shafts, and even ventilation disguised as termite mounds. American bombers dropped thousands of pounds of explosives, but the tunnels endured. Napalm scorched the jungle canopy, but the maze below survived. It was as if the land itself protected its defenders. Every inch of progress above ground was undone by what hid beneath it. To fight this invisible enemy, the tunnel rats became something more than soldiers. They became explorers of the underworld. Their missions went beyond search and destroy. They gathered intelligence, mapped the tunnels, and brought back proof of what the world above could not imagine. Each discovery revealed how deeply the Viet Cong had embedded themselves, not just physically, but mentally. The tunnels weren't just protection. They were a symbol of endurance, of belief that no bomb could break. Life underground for the Viet Cong was brutal, but it was organised. They slept on bamboo mats, cooked with vented fires, and stored weapons in hidden chambers sealed behind walls of clay. Medical stations treated the wounded in candlelight. Messengers ran through the tunnels with notes wrapped in oil paper, their footsteps muffled by the soil. Some fighters lived underground for months, rarely seeing the sun. For the Americans, understanding the tunnel system was like trying to read a book written in another language. It changed constantly. Every time a network was mapped, it was already being rebuilt somewhere else. Destroying the tunnels often meant collapsing sections with explosives, but the earth swallowed the blasts and healed over. It was a war that could never be won by sheer power. For every tunnel destroyed, two more appeared. The Viet Cong had turned the ground itself into an ally, and the Americans were fighting a ghost that could vanish at will. As months turned into years, the hidden war beneath Vietnam grew more personal, more psychological. The tunnel rats carried home more than scars. They carried the memory of darkness that never ended. Above the jungle, the war had lines and borders. Below it, there were none. Only men crawling through the earth, searching for an enemy that could not die. By the end of the war, the tunnels of Vietnam had become legend, a place of whispers and fear, where the ground itself had become the enemy. For the tunnel rats, it wasn't legend. It was memory. A memory made of dirt, breath, and silence that could crush a man's soul. When the fighting stopped, engineers uncovered an underground world that defied imagination. Hidden hospitals, sleeping quarters, command rooms, even classrooms, all carved by hand, all invisible from the sky. It was more than a network. It was a city beneath the jungle, and every inch of it had been built under the threat of death. For the men who once crawled through those passages, seeing them in daylight felt surreal. They realised just how deep they had gone, how close they had come to unseen enemies, to death waiting behind thin walls of clay. Every tunnel they'd entered had been a gamble between courage and the earth itself. When they returned home, many found that the war had followed them. The smell of wet soil, the weight of the dark, the sound of dripping water, it lived inside them. They woke in the night with the same suffocating panic, still reaching for the light that never came. The tunnels were eventually sealed, but their ghosts never were. Beneath the soil of Vietnam, some remain untouched, narrow corridors filled with the echoes of those who fought, crawled and died in silence. Visitors who enter them today describe the same suffocating air, the same chill that once pressed against the hearts of men who went in with nothing but a flashlight and faith. The Tunnel Rats' War was one without victory parades or headlines. It was a battle fought inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat. They didn't seek glory, only survival. In a war of fire and thunder, they fought in whispers. In a world of explosions, they fought in darkness. History remembers the great battles, Hue, Khe Sanh, Ia Drang, but few remember the men who fought where the sun could not reach, the ones who crawled through the earth, chasing ghosts with a pistol and a prayer. If you made it this far, thank you for walking this road with us. If you love stories like this, true stories of courage, fear and forgotten bravery, make sure to subscribe, hit like and tap the hype button so more people can discover them too. Until next time, keep your head low, your spirit steady, and remember the soldiers who faced the darkness beneath the jungle and never let it break them.